What's up guys, Matthew Monis here and welcome to my camera comparison. I'm comparing the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus versus the Sony Xperia XZ2. Both fantastic 2018 flagship phones. Which one has the better camera? Let's find out. First, we have a ceiling with light shining through. This is a great way to show exposure. The XZ2 takes a more natural look to its photos. I also find it to have slightly more dynamic range and does a much better job in the shadows. Whereas the S9 Plus slightly overexposes the shot, you lose a little bit of detail in the shadows, but I can see the tiles more on the left-hand side of the picture. I don't think either camera did a better job, it's just two different looks, and it really comes down to personal preference. The next picture is of a sport check sign. This is just a regular photo. I think both cameras handled it pretty well. I find the XZ2 to have more dynamic range, to be a little bit more punchier, and it did a slightly better job with the lighting and the sports check logo. Next up is the exact same photo, but with HDR turned on. Both of these cameras did a terrible job taking the photos. Sport check is completely blown out. The colors look a little bit too oversaturated. Overall, it's just not a pleasing look. But one thing I did notice is the detail in the tiles below. The XZ2 did a better job of picking up those tiles and the dirt on the floor compared to the S9 Plus. This photo does a good job of showing dynamic range. On the XZ2, you see a little bit more dynamic range, but I personally think the S9 Plus looks more visually appealing. Now here's the big differences. If you look at the black gun, the S9 Plus, because it slightly overexposes its shots, you can see more detail on the Lego pieces. But if you look at the helmet, there's more detail on the XZ2 than there is on the S9 Plus. It's very clear when you look at the front portion of the helmet, you can see the lines where the Lego pieces connect a lot easier on the XZ2. The other area is the floor. If you look at the yellow portion of the floor, you see a lot more detail on the XZ2. You can actually see the brown specks, where on the S9 Plus it's slightly washed out. Now this is the exact same photo but with HDR on. Both photos get a slight boost to colors. Overall, they still look great. I still find the S9 Plus to be slightly more visually appealing, whereas the XZ2 looks a little bit more realistic. Now both photos are great, not much of a difference except for a slight color boost. Now I wanted to test depth of field, and this is where the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus just does a better job because it has a higher aperture at f1.5. As you can see, the background is a lot more blurred, depth of field is better, and the character itself is a lot more clear with less noise. The XZ2 does an okay job. The background is slightly blurred, but the picture itself has a lot more noise, which means it needs to compensate with ISO. So now we're taking things outside, and both cameras did a fantastic job with this photo. The S9 Plus tends to boost up the greenery, taking away detail from the shadows, whereas the XZ2, the green is not as punchy, but the overall picture offers a little bit more dynamic range and you get more detail in the shadows. That's very clear on the front of the greenery. You can see the individual leaves a lot better. Now, if you look at the side of the house where the light is shining on, it's slightly overexposed on the S9 Plus, whereas on the XZ2, you do get some more detail. So this is the exact same photo but with HDR on. The S9 Plus definitely did a better job. Now the shadows are not as dark, so you can see more detail now. The side of the house has more detail compared to the previous photo, so it's not as overexposed, but the XZ2 did a poor job with HDR on. The sky completely changed color. It now has like this white tone to it. The leaves are overblown, and the side of the house is slightly more overexposed than it was in the previous photo. So in this shot, it shows another great advantage of the XZ2 and showcasing its dynamic range. There's a little bit more dynamic range in the XZ2 than there is in the S9 Plus. Both phones do a great job of exposing the image, but definitely you can see a little bit more detail, especially in the tiles with the XZ2. Now this is where the 19 megapixel sensor comes into play. When you zoom into this photo, you can see slightly more detail with the XZ2. You can sort of make out the bananas, you can actually read the sign, whereas on the S9 Plus, it's completely overblown. So now we're moving on to nighttime photography, and I think the XZ2 does a better job. Now look at it closely. If you look at the road, you see a lot more detail in the road itself. You can see the bumps, you can see the grooves, whereas on the S9 Plus, it's over sharpened and that detail has been lost. Same holds true at the bottom of the store just below the windows. You can see the individual bricks on the XZ2, where again on the S9 Plus that detail has been lost. Now I think the S9 Plus did a slightly better job with exposure, but because of that and the over sharpening, you're just losing a lot of detail. So again, another night photo. This time the S9 Plus completely overexposed the shot. Definitely looks better with the XZ2. There's more dynamic range, there's more detail, and you can see this when you're looking at certain things. If you look at the bush on the XZ2, there's a lot more detail compared to the S9 Plus where it's over sharpened and some of that detail is lost. Look at the shadows on the top of the building. You can see them a lot better on the XZ2 than you can on the S9 Plus. In this nighttime shot, it's extremely dark. Only thing lighting the side of my face is a little bit of light from the window. Again, you can see the differences on the way the camera processes these images. With the XZ2, you don't get as much over sharpening, but it has to compensate by cranking up the ISO, introducing a lot of noise. The result is a very grainy photo, but you definitely see a little bit more detail. With the S9 Plus, you get less ISO, but you get more over sharpening. You get less detail, but a more smooth image, which some might say is more visually appealing. In this photo, we're comparing Sony's bokeh mode, which is a separate software application in the camera app, to Samsung's live focus. Now, basically what this does is it blurs the background. It's a lot easier to do on the S9 Plus. It does a better job of blurring the background. It looks a little bit more natural, whereas on the XZ2, it literally looks like someone imported to Photoshop and just used the paintbrush in the background. It didn't do a good job of picking up the stroller or my son's hand. But there is a lot more detail on the picture itself in the XZ2 compared to the S9 Plus. Now, in all fairness, the S9 Plus does have a second lens, making this situation a lot easier, whereas on the XZ2, it's strictly relying on software processing. Now, this is the front-facing camera, and as you can see here, the XZ2 has a lot more detail in the shot, whereas on the Galaxy S9 Plus, beauty mode is kicking in, smoothing out the face, and you're losing a lot of detail. For front-facing cameras, I'm definitely going to give this to the XZ2. So Sony's the first company to bring 960 frames per second to their smartphones, and they did this at 720p, but this is the first time they're doing it at 1080p. It's also the first time that 960 has been introduced to the Galaxy line, but they're doing it at 720p. So in this video, you can see more detail with the Sony Xperia XZ2, but in order to compensate for light, they had to bump up the ISO. Both phones do a great job of slowing down the footage. I don't have complaints in terms of that capability, but I think the Galaxy S9 Plus does a better job with software. With the Sony, you have to line up the timing perfectly, whereas the Galaxy S9 Plus does all the guesswork for you. And last up, we got 4K video. As you can see here, the Sony Xperia XZ2 is doing a better job of stabilizing the footage using Steady Shot. But the picture quality and image has a lot more detail with the Galaxy S9 Plus. So better stabilization with the XZ2, but a better image with the S9 Plus. So that wraps up my comparison between the XZ2 and the Galaxy S9 Plus. Both fantastic cameras that have slightly different strengths overall. I like the XZ2 because it has more dynamic range, and I personally find it handles nighttime shots a little bit better. But the S9 Plus has better colors and contrast in its video, the software is also better, and the camera application's a lot quicker. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Which one is your favorite camera and why? Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to hit the like button. Follow me on Instagram. I'll have a lot more pictures and photos to look at, and I'll see you guys in the next video.